Welcome to the Casual Author Podcast. I'm Dan, sci-fi and fantasy author. Like you, I've got a lot on my plate. What with many children, a full-time job, a homestead, and loads of other responsibilities. I'm here to bring you inspiration, positivity, and community around having a busy life and still wanting to chase that author dream, even if you have to take a casual approach. For more information about the podcast, me, or my books, head to thecasualauthor.com. Let's get started. Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 145 of The Casual Author. Today we're talking to Paul J Bennett about going professional with your authoring. We talk about Paul's starting point with his writing 4 or 5 years ago, and when he went professional, when he quit his job and was able to go full-time with his writing. We talk about the writing and the publishing of his over 30 books, mostly fantasy books in those years, and how he and his wife have created this business that works for them, and the steps that he took to get to that point. So it was very, very informational and helpful for someone like myself who looks at that person and says, oh, I'd love to be full-time. Let's talk about how you got there. Now, I will say Paul has some amazing benefits and or how do I say this, blessings, in that his wife loves to edit and likes doing the cover design and marketing aspects. So he really has a kind of dream situation, but it's still amazing to talk to him and learn about his kind of professional making habits and tactics. So stick around for that conversation. I failed to mention that today is Friday, November 22nd, as I record this. So just gives you a little bit of context on timing. But updates. I will have to say this last week was a tad bit of a whirlwind. I actually went on a vacation definitely not a vacation, a work business trip. So my work flew me to San Diego to meet with my team, which was kind of nice, right? Working remotely. I've worked remotely for, I want to say, 7 years now. And in some of the places I've worked, I have never met my coworkers or managers in person. It's always been just, the box, the Zoom box, their face and their shoulders. That's about all I get. So it was great to meet them in person, kind of understand what makes them tick, what they're interested in. And that was really nice. However, I will say, totally threw off my schedule, right? In terms of writing and editing and marketing and everything. Here I was hoping that I would have all this extra time, right? Where I'd finish work there and then I'd go to the hotel and maybe write or do editing or even figure out some ad stuff. But I was just tired. So the one thing that I forget about myself working in an office in my house is just how introverted I am. Now, Zoom calls can be draining, and I'm on calls all the time for my work and even for the podcast every once in a while. But I forget how tired you get, particularly when you're in person. And so seeing all these people in person was amazing and everything. But by the end of each day, I was just ready to go to bed or stick my nose in a book and just forget time and life existed. So I think the biggest thing that was tricky about the business trip was optimizing the homestead so that my wife didn't go crazy while I was gone, because I do a lot of things on the homestead. While in the morning we'll go out and we'll milk together, but then I stand up and I kind of do the rest of it. And once again, this is in no way a knock on my wife. I'm not saying she's not helpful. All I'm saying is I do kind of the heavy lifting, the water carrying, the manure cleanup, and getting their food situated, feeding the bottle to the buck, or not to the buck, goodness gracious, to our calf. Dealing with all those things. And I didn't really think too much about what that might be like to do all of it, because I just naturally do it. She takes the milk, she goes inside and she takes care of it. So that's making cheese and cooking with it and whatnot, which I don't do any of that. I help with the dishes. But still, going on a business trip, it really fell to her and the kids. So I did the best that I could to optimize everything, pre-feed the animals these big bales of hay so she wouldn't have to feed them, get a cart and extra buckets so that she could carry water from the hydrants to their water trough. And while he was gone, she indicated that I did a pretty good job of optimizing things, but it was still overwhelming, right? When chores for her normally take 45 minutes, they were taking an hour and a half because she was having to do it all. My kids definitely stepped up. The oldest three, the boys, were thrilled to go out and help her, and her mother came in town. So definitely I was not going to leave her to the 7 kids in the homestead without some type of support. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law came into town and helped with the cooking and the cleaning and taking care of the kids. So she was definitely not left alone, but still, it was wild and it was tricky. But it's nice to be back into the groove of things. And yeah, that's that. I will say I did do some writing. I wouldn't say a significant amount of writing, but I got around on the travel days. I would write on the airplane. Those days I got between 2 and 3,000 words because when you're on an airplane, there's not much more you can do. I'm not really a huge movie watcher, so just wrote on my computer. And at one point, I just had to stop because my computer was dying. I didn't have a plug-in situation on that particular plane. But yeah, I'm grateful for what I was able to write. So that kind of segues into author updates. And I guess, well, I'll talk a little bit more about Homestead Updates in a minute, but I'm making significant progress on Fairy Blooded, which is book 4 of the Hidden Heritage books. The idea here is I want to get all 6 books written as quickly as possible. I am still in the editing phase for Demon Bladed, which is still with the line editor. She was hoping to finish by Thanksgiving, but I don't think that's going to happen. Just because Thanksgiving is coming up so fast, and she did just start November 1st. So it's pretty rigorous editing schedule. I think she's going to take some time after that, which is great. I'm in no hurry. The published date for Demon Blooded is still March. So March 24th is the date I'm shooting for, and that gives me some really good time to get those line edits back and work with them. But I want to say I'm about 22,000 words, 25,000 words into Fairy Blooded, which is exciting. It's pretty wild how fast time goes. I'm enjoying the story so far, right? I've talked a little bit about it, but writing from the perspective of Jared, who's in book 1 and in Dragon Blooded, it's very different. You know, he's been a character for the first 3 books, and now we're finally getting to hear from him, which is kind of fun. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that perspective of it. The thing that's a little bit tricky is not getting, at least for me, is not getting bored or tired of the story. I haven't gotten to that point quite yet, but I have shiny new thing syndrome where my brain just wants to write something new. I've got all these story ideas, and that's why I try to scratch that itch by writing short stories. I did end up submitting another short story to Writers of the Future last quarter, came back with another honorable mention, which great. I mean, pat myself on the back, but I don't know. I feel like they give honorable mentions away like candy. So I think they're just being nice. I'm still, proud of the stories, but I need to do some editing and turn them into something more permanent. The thing that's tricky about me is I'm incapable of writing short stories within the worlds and with characters that already exist. For some reason, I feel the need to write new ones. So all I'm doing is stacking up my future books and series with all of these short stories, which are kind of like extended prologues to a longer series of books. That's a good problem to have, right? I've got all these kind of series starters that I've been putting together unintentionally with my pantsing, my discovery writing brain, and it just provides lots of options for me to continue with these stories. Not that I need them, but I feel like I've done some pre-work for some future books and story series. So very grateful for that. Let's see. In other author news, I have realized something very, very important, that I need to do some workshopping for my book description. So the one thing I can do is write a story, and I can write a pretty dang good story. But the challenge is summarizing that story into a sales script or sales copy to try to convince someone else to read that. And that's always been a weakness of mine. And I tried to leverage AI to help me with that, putting my books in their fullness in AI and saying like, hey, come up with a description. Now, of course, I wouldn't take that description 100%. I workshopped it and edited it, but I don't know that's as helpful. I think the one thing about me is I'm a very intuitive person. I intuitively know what can and will work as I learn more things and gain more data and gain more understanding. And I don't know that for this specific instance, AI is going to be serving me well. I think I'll be better off trusting my instincts. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board on the descriptions for my books and kind of trust my instincts, look at some other authors, see what they've accomplished, how they've written their descriptions, and see how I can kind of trust my instincts there and see if I can make more progress with sales and reaching the right readers. So that's going to be fun. Experiment. Now, of course, the trick is making the time to do all those things. That is by far a different problem to solve because there's times of the essence. I don't have a lot of time to pour into that essence, so to speak. So that's okay. I'll figure it out. Maybe get less sleep. Ha ha ha. Just kidding. I shouldn't get less sleep. Oh, I mean, I'm trying to think through the right solutions. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, I've appreciated some of the people who have started putting comments on the YouTube channel and or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're dropping notes, or rather comments. Let me know where you're listening from. Let me know what you like about the podcast, things that you've learned. I want to know what makes you tick, what things you're interested in, and if you have suggestions for people to interview or more topics to talk about, I would love to hear from you as my listeners. I want to make this more of a conversation. So definitely message me or email me at authordkenner@gmail.com. That's my author one. Or, of course, if it's easier for you, just do dan@thecasualauthor.com. They both reach the same place. So whatever's more convenient for you. Let's see. I believe that's updates, all the updates for today. So let's go ahead and shift over to the interview portion with Paul. Hey, Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks.
I'm really looking forward to learning more about you and hearing your story. You have quite the story when it comes to writing, which we'll get to in just a second. But before we dive into all the fun things, how long have you been writing and publishing books?
I have been writing for 7 years, full time for 5 years.
Nice. And you've written about 250 books, right? No,
I wish. No, I've written 30. I guess it depends if we have a couple that are in the slot, going through the editing process. So we actually have 30. I'm writing 34 right now.
very cool. That's awesome. So 7 years ago is when you actually started writing in earnest or just started writing at all?
Well, I tried writing for years, and I was a pantser. I would, just make up the stories as I go, but I always found that I never really got to where I wanted to go.
Mhm.
And I got some stories that got about halfway done, and I just didn't know where to take the story from. And I mean, I know other authors that write that way, yourself included, and I think it's great that people can do that. I just find it doesn't work for me, so I end up having to plan everything out so I have a script to follow. Sometimes it's a looser script, just so I have a general idea of where things are going, and other times there's a lot more.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So it just, you realized your kind of mistake in trying to discovery write or whatever 7 years ago and decided to put an outline together and you found that the writing was smoother then. Is that right?
Yep, yep. And actually,
Nice.
even though I tried those other stories previously, I've taken elements of those and used them in later stories, some of the characters especially. So it wasn't wasted time at all. Certainly
Yeah,
had my use.
I actually like that. So I've actually talked to a lot of authors who say they've written something that they were embarrassed about or they didn't like and they shoved it in a drawer and said, I'm never looking at that again. And I couldn't, right? I feel like those are ideas. Those are valuable things that you could use, repurpose, rewrite. I don't know. There's all sorts of things you could do with it. Just can't imagine
Yep.
shoving something in a drawer and not using it later. So
Yeah,
sounds like
yeah.
you
Just all
repurposed
that
it.
effort, right?
Agreed. I think that's so. Did you ever think that you'd go full time ever or as quickly as you did?
No. So I was a tech instructor. I taught IT at what you would call a private college, I guess, in American terms.
Okay.
And I was just writing part time. And I'd been running role playing games for years and years. So I was already used to creating plots and characters and things like that. And then after a while, the book started to pick up, and it got to the point where it was worthwhile to give up my full time job because we were making enough money off the books that I didn't need to do both.
Yeah.
So that was nice.
That's I would say more than nice. That's everyone's dream. You're living the dream
Yeah.
over
Well, I
there,
mean, I'm
Paul.
not driving a Maserati or anything, so I'm not
Yet,
a billionaire.
Paul, you're
But
not
we're
driving a Maserati yet. No, just obviously
yeah,
it's more than just money. There's a lot that goes into it. And I think a lot of people forget that going full time is possible for one, but they also forget that it's not easy, right? I'm sure you've seen a lot of
that's a lot of
things. You've
work.
been through a lot of challenges and shifts in strategy and everything. But did you find yourself a little bit nervous when you went full time, or was it a pretty smooth transition for you?
Yes, I think the biggest thing for me was my wife Carol is a big supporter. She does the editing and a lot of the marketing and stuff. So we've worked
Nice.
together before on other projects and businesses. So we work well together, and I think it was the perfect timing for both of
That's a very, very cool built-in editor. I love it. I
us.
think that's great. Built-in system, I should say. No, I mean that's very cool. I think there's a lot of things that maybe people don't have editors that, their spouse or a friend or someone close by that they can edit. But what a wonderful blessing for you to have that and to be able to partner with someone that you're close with on the marketing aspects. So are you someone who likes marketing or are you not a fan of that piece of it?
No, 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 no,
No.
no. I'm a writer. I'm not a marketer. It's I mean, I understand how marketing works. I just it's not something I'm really good at. So I'll leave that to others.
Yep. Yes, I think if I could do that, I totally would. Maybe someday I'll get there. I'll have some type of person I can pay an assistant or something. But until then, keep trying to figure that out. I'm curious to know what shifted after 2 years. So you write 7 years, started writing 7 years ago. You'd written maybe how many books had you written in that first 2 years before things started picking up?
Five
Five. Okay.
books,
Very
yeah.
good.
I actually wrote my very first book. I finished, but I didn't publish it right away. I had read somewhere online had someone had said, write your first book, put it away, and then forget about it, and then write the book you're going to publish. I didn't quite do that. I wrote the first book, learned a lot from doing it, wrote the second book, and then I learned enough from the second book that I went back and did a major edit of the first, and then we released it. And I think it made a huge difference too.
Nice. And I don't have an old version of that first book. Now I kind of wish I did.
Well, the
I
The
want to
issue,
know what it was
yeah,
like.
I think we sold 12 books of the first edition. There was a lot of, we had to change some names and things like
Mm.
that. I made some pretty common mistakes actually for first time authors. But the nice thing, of course, when you're self publishing is you've got all the masters. You can change the EPUBs. And at that time, we weren't doing print copies. That came a little, so it wasn't too bad. So we recovered and things have gone smoothly since then.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to know what some of those common mistakes were, just for people listening. A lot of people who listen to this podcast are either writing their first book or are aspiring to write their first book. So if
Yeah.
you could enlighten us on what were some of those mistakes that you made.
One of them is, and I've actually, I follow writers groups on Facebook and such, and there's some controversy over some of these, but,
That's fair.
in the first book, there's a lot of, instead of just saying he said, she said, or replied, there's a lot of extra terms in there, like he exclaimed or whatever, things that just kind of,
Mm,
they become a bit messy after a while. And so I go back and I read it now and it's a little cringy when because I don't write like that now so much. So that's I think a common issue that people have. Some people are very strict. They said you just use the word said, that's it, period. I think there's some leeway there, but you don't want to go too much in one direction or the other. Everything in moderation, I guess, is a good rule of thumb.
definitely. You mentioned changing names. Was there something around the names that you found
I
that you
had,
made
yeah,
mistakes on?
originally the names of places were actual real world locations.
Oh, I see.
But I think that confused the issue because then people thought it was supposed to be historical, but it wasn't. It was fantasy. So we changed up the names. There was a very English flavor. So, I pick names like Wincaster was not an actual English city, but it sounds like one. So that kind of set the tone for the Heir to the Crown series. And then the other series take place in more of a European scenario. So they have kind of Germanic sounding names just to sort of give it more of a European flavor.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So you clearly did your research on language and place names and to
Hey,
put
well,
the right
Google's great,
flavors in.
yeah, great,
Google is great.
great
That's
help for
true.
that.
That's true. What did writers do before Google? Library research? Is that what they spent most of their time doing?
Well, I mean, years ago, I used to use a typewriter. That's where I learned to type. I can't imagine typing out something now because I'm so much faster on a computer keyboard as opposed to an actual typewriter. But I mean, you do what you have to do, right?
Hmm.
You would. And of course, we didn't have self-publishing way back when I was younger, so there wasn't really any other option except submitting something to a publisher, and that never really appealed to me because of the loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, as self-publisher, you get a bigger percentage of the profits. You're not sharing it with a publishing house or having to rely on a publishing house to do some of that other stuff. Of course, now looking back, it'd be nice to have a publishing house to do some of that stuff.
Right.
But you're losing a lot of the profits if you do that. So.
Well, and I mean, just to put this in perspective as well, the number of books you've written in the short years that you have, it's unlikely that those would have come to market if you tried to do traditional publishing. Just by the
Oh
length to
yeah,
publish is kind of insane for traditional publishing. There's no way you would have been able
yeah.
to
I
publish
mean,
that many books so
I would
quickly.
probably have like I don't know 2 or 3 books out if I went
Yeah,
that route.
probably about. I mean, not to exaggerate, it's kind of crazy how long it takes for
Well,
that to
especially for a
run.
new author, right? It's different
Yeah,
if you're established,
that's
but if
true.
you're a
That's
new
fair.
author trying to break in to the traditional market, it's a very difficult thing to do.
Was there any point while you were, switching to pro, we'll say when you went pro, that you doubted being self-published, or have you always been pretty confident in building a
Um,
business off of it?
I mean, in the early days, you kind of worry like, are you selling enough books to pay the bills, that kind of thing. But other than that, I felt comfortable with the aspect of writing. It took me a while to sort of nail down my sort of daily routine. but it works well. And one of the pieces of advice that I read very early was nothing sells book one like book two.
Mm, okay.
And it's funny because The Heir to the Crown, Servant of the Crown was the first book in that series, but I always envisioned it as a longer story. Now, originally, I didn't intend to go 15 book. That's how long the series will be, plus some side stories. But that became clear after I got, I think, about book two or three. Yeah, after book three, that's when I knew it was going to be the long haul. And, part of that was I've always I like reading things like, well, for example, Lord of the Rings is a great tale, but everyone starts at a very high level, right? Aragorn is this amazing fighter, and even the Gimli is a really good fighter. And I'm more interested in how did they get there? How did they become these heroes? What's their
Yeah.
background? Where did they start from? And that's really was the inspiration for Servant of the Crown.
Cool. It's like an origin story. Some of
Yeah,
your
and
key players.
when you look at the 15 book series, the first five books really tell the origin of the kingdom. I mean, the kingdom was already there, but those in power coming to power. And then the next five books are all about them trying to establish control over the kingdom. And the last five lead into this really massive war that engulfs the entire continent, basically.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting into it. I started the first book. We were talking prior to recording. Started the first book, and I know it's going to be a commitment. Seeing how many books there are in that series, I'm excited to dive in.
Yep.
So that would be great.
It's
Sorry,
one of the things too is the first book has a very light touch of magic, so it introduces you to how magic works very slowly, and then as the series progresses, there's more magic involved.
okay, very good. Well, that makes it even more exciting. I love magic. I love magic systems. I find the kind of extraordinary, fascinating in stories. That's why I like to read fantasy. Not that I dislike fantasy without magic. I like fantasy in general, but definitely gravitate towards the magic-filled variety. So this is gonna be a tricky question because I don't think I've talked to a lot of people that have gone pro with their writing. I know it's different for every person, but I'm curious to know what was the what's the word I'm looking for? Change point in your career that made you realize that you could go full time? Right? Was there like any type of was there a specific event? Or was there like a strategy you tried? You're like, oh, this is working. That
It
made
was
you realize you
actually
could.
my wife told me it was time.
Okay, okay,
We enjoyed working on it. I mean, at that time, I was working on it in the evenings and weekends.
right.
Um, and she was, at that point in time, she was home during the day. So she was doing editing and stuff. And we would talk at lunchtime. Because I was working at the college, I'd have lunch off. So I'd just walk around, with a Bluetooth headset and we'd chat over story elements and stuff. And I think that was kind of the turning point. She realized that we could make a living doing this and instead of, doing two jobs and so on.
I think it's amazing, particularly that you have kind of that sounding board, that person to help you, business partner, so to speak. I mean, let's be honest, Carol's probably doing a lot of the work, right?
Yep, yep.
But
She takes care of all the financials. So
oh,
she knew
fun
the
stuff.
numbers inside and she's great with numbers. So she had everything figured out before we sort of took the plunge and how we were going to afford this, that, and the other, and so on. So that
Very
was
cool.
encouraging.
So I want to talk about marketing. I know marketing's not your expertise, so I know Carol is hanging out in the room. So if she needs to step in,
Yeah, yeah.
definitely
You
feel
probably hear
free
the
to. No
keyboard
pressure.
tapping
But
away.
there's tons of marketing options, right? There's social media, there's Facebook ads, Amazon ads, different publishing strategies, Amazon exclusive, going wide, all these things. And I know it's different. Every author has had a lot of different experiences, different ways. So for
Yep.
you, what was your strategy? What strategies do you employ for your marketing?
We first of all we publish wide.
Okay,
Actually,
wide.
the first book we published was actually on the Kobo platform.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So we're Canadian. Kobo is a Canadian platform, and we also figured, Amazon is the big one, of course, but Amazon is a little more complicated to work with. So we figured Kobo is a nice, easy one to sort of ease into, and it's been a strong supporter of indie writers for quite some time. So it wasn't long after that we went into Amazon, of course, but we've used Facebook ads, Amazon ads, BookBub. They all help. But I think more recently it's been TikTok that's been probably the biggest pusher of sales. Not that we're necessarily pushing sales, we're just creating a presence on TikTok, but people seem to respond to that a huge impact on our sales as well.
I mean, I've heard a lot of people say they've had success with TikTok. I've also heard a lot of people say they have not had success with TikTok. So, what's been something you've learned that has worked for you? What
Um,
recommendations you have for someone on
TikTok is
TikTok?
kind of an unusual one because you can cruise along and not see much difference for months on end, and then suddenly something goes viral. It doesn't matter what people seem to say, you can't predict what's going to go viral. For a while I was doing puns. So we would
Mm-hmm.
record 2 to 3 videos a day, and we would post them on all the platforms, not just TikTok. And the puns were kind of like once a day kind of a thing. And occasionally they would get a massive hit. Our numbers grew steadily, but they kind of tapered off. I think it was around 3,000. And then suddenly it just took a leap and grew from there. So we've tried to analyze, you look at one that does well and you try to reproduce it. It doesn't work. It's just a weird formula. I don't know, some strange algorithm that determines how things are going to go.
I mean, yeah, you can't always plan on the algorithms. They're constantly shifting, and it would be nice if certain videos went viral. In my case, an unfortunate series of events, I posted a cat video that went viral. So
Emma.
that,
Yes, Emma, right? That's
yes, yeah. Which, everyone, it's funny when people see my follower count. They're like, "Oh, you're doing so great on TikTok," and I was like, "No." Because all of those people are cat lovers, which I have
yeah,
nothing against cat lovers. I think that's amazing, but I don't write books about cats.
yeah.
So it's just like, sorry, you're gonna be kind of disappointed. I know you came here for Emma and you're getting fantasy books.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's my bad though. Try and
We
stay
we
stay
uh,
in one lane
we
with
tend to concentrate
TikTok.
these days on typically either about the writing process
Hmm.
or like a daily life in what we're doing. So we
Yep.
often do a video about like what did we do today, how much did I write, or something related to writing. Or we'll do a video about to encourage other people to write, follow your dreams, kind of
Yeah,
a
I
thing.
love that.
And occasionally, of course, we'll promote a book, especially if there's a new release coming. But people really seem to respond to the whole idea of just promoting your dreams and getting advice on what they can.
Yeah.
One of my favorite pieces of advice is if you've never played, let's say, baseball before, you wouldn't expect to be able to walk out and play an amazing game of baseball, right? Or if you want to be a soccer player, you've got to practice. And writing is the same process. If you don't write, you can't get better at writing. So I like to encourage people to write. And quite frankly, I look at some of my old stuff and think, oh, that's horrible. Right? So my
Yeah.
pre-publishing days, especially. But that's all part of the process. The more you write, the better you get at it, and that's how you learn what works and what doesn't work.
Well, and I'm gonna jump on there and agree. I definitely agree with you. The writing, just writing and writing is the good way to learn, but also not being too concerned about perfection with your writing, right? I
Yeah,
think
definitely.
obviously you want to get it as good as possible when it comes to publication, but I've talked to a lot of people who took 10, 15 years to write a book, and it's just like, oh, that's a really long time, right? You just have to
Yeah,
wonder it was it worth the time, right? When you could have said, this is good enough. I'm going to publish it and move on to something else, knowing that I'm only going to get better. There's only so much learning you can make from one book
yep,
versus
I would agree with
doing
that.
different things. So,
I think too, we kind of fall as authors, we fall into the trap of trying to be perfect.
yeah, definitely.
Like you said, someone works on something for years. It's never going to be perfect. You're always going to find
Mm,
fault with something, and you're always going to want to be tweaking. And sometimes you have to take the plunge and put it out there. And like I said, today's a modern age of electronic publishing. Nothing says you can't edit it and re-release it. I've seen a number of authors that have done just that. So
yep.
it's a good thing about the age we live in.
And if you have to do that, that's okay. There's nothing to be scared out there. But I'm curious to know what this is kind of an off-base question. I'm curious if it has been on your mind, but hecklers and haters, is that something that you've worried about for your
In
books?
the early
Because
days, I found it very difficult, but my wife filters all that stuff for me. So
oh, nice.
she'll just
Okay.
pass on the good reviews.
That's good. So she gets to see the negative stuff, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, there's not. It's not like there's a lot of them. In the early days, there was a couple of really critical ones that just really got me down, and that was hard to deal with. So then she just started passing on the good ones, and that's very much more encouraging.
Yeah.
And then we even get people that email just saying how much they love the books and everything. And that's great. I usually when I do my author's notes for a particular book, I always make sure to thank the readers because it's really them that are encouraging me to write more. Let's face it, if no one read the books, I wouldn't be up to book 34.
It's true. Yeah. And that's the thing that people forget about is, sorry, what was,
Sorry, I just realized it's book 35 I'm working on now. I
oh,
can't even keep track.
I mean, I've heard once you get above book 20, it's hard to keep track of the numbers. So
It is
that's what
difficult.
I've heard a
Yes.
number of people say. But no, I mean, I think it's encouraging to hear. I know it sounds kind of crazy that you had days where things were challenging, where you saw negative reviews, because I think a lot of authors publish their first, second, third books, and then they're seeing some negative reviews, and it just gets them down. It stops them. But they forget that for, 10, for every one person who doesn't like your book, there's likely 10 that do like your book. And so you just have to, focus on those people and the readers who enjoy it and, keep writing and
Yep.
working
And I
with them.
mean, to be
That makes
honest,
sense.
you could look up J.R.R. Tolkien or Stephen King, and they would have negative reviews, right? And then you realize, okay, this person doesn't like your books. That doesn't mean the books aren't good. It just means it's not to their taste.
Right.
And then you move on. You get used to it after a while, but it can still, bring you down if you were to focus on it too much.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely wears on you. But I want to come back to the readers because you said something that I think a lot of authors forget about is that the readers they're the people who are literally, in your case, providing for you, right?
Yep, yep,
It's because of them that you are able to write full time, that you're able to have your needs financially for your family and for your life. And there's nothing, I think a lot of people are either afraid to admit that, or maybe they forget it, thinking that if I write this book, it's entirely up to me to write this. And but it's like, actually, it's not. It's up to you and the readers, the people you're writing to.
yes.
So, what recommendations do you have for connecting with those readers and creating community with them?
So we do a newsletter every week. We publish a newsletter, and part of that is I'll write an article which I call work in progress. So I
Mhm.
literally talk about what I'm doing in the last week. That helps keep me accountable because then I need to, make sure I'm on track for whatever it is I'm intending to publish the next book. And then we'll talk about stuff that we're doing around the house, or I'll throw in an article on something else about the world that I'm writing in, or maybe even just a historical fact. I'm a big history buff. So,
Nice.
I talked about the origin of different holidays and ships and airplanes and all kinds of stuff because that's just what interests me. And we've had good response to that kind of thing. We also do a newsletter giveaway, or not, sorry, a book giveaway every week, and this is reaching like 20,000 people at the
Nice.
moment. And when we do book swaps with other people, and then there'll be links in there for free books and stuff like that from other authors, not just for me. So I think that kind of engagement works well. We've had some great feedback on our surveys. Every newsletter has a survey. Sometimes it's just a funny survey, like what's your favorite dessert?
Mm-hmm.
Other times it might be like, what do you think of this new concept for a book cover? Do you like it, not like it? Or, so we get a lot of feedback that way as well. But I think that's a form of engagement that works really well. And you can tell when it does work because the software we use for the newsletter reports how many responses we get. And
Okay.
you can see a spike when it's something that piques someone's interest. So that's really handy.
And what system do you use for that?
Mailer light.
Mailer Lite.
Mailer Lite. Okay. I've heard various things about people having opinions on different email sending services. Mailer Lite is what you use. I think that's great. I haven't really done much with Mailer Lite, but I've heard good things about it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's worked well for us.
good. I mean, as long as it's working, there's no reason to change. But so, curious, I want to talk a little bit about the covers as well, because your covers are stunning. I've taken a look at those. Do you do those yourself? Do you have
Thank
someone you
you.
work with? Okay, the all your Carol is
So,
doing a lot of work. I'm impressed.
well, so interestingly enough, our original cover for Servant of the Crown was done by my oldest daughter. She's a graphic artist.
Cool. Very cool.
Um, but she was far too busy doing her like a full time. She doesn't work as a graphic artist. She just has a degree in it, and she works
Right.
elsewhere. So she had to move on. And now Carol does all that. So she has Adobe, and she's taught herself a lot of how to do everything. And my youngest daughter also is big into photography. She has a degree in
Nice.
photography, so she helps her with a lot of the Photoshop stuff, but she's kind of gone beyond the point of the basic user now. So, with the help of the Adobe stock images and some
Hmm.
manipulation, that's where most of these covers come from. It can take
Very, very
forever
cool.
though to come up with a concept for the cover. That's the hardest part.
He just
Yeah.
says he wants something, and I come up with the idea.
Yeah.
You just write the book, right? No, I'm sure you do more than that, but I hope you're paying Carol well because it
Yep.
sounds like she's lifting the business very. But I am curious. This is completely random question, but given that you bounce ideas off of each other, it sounds like you and Carol are pretty close during the writing process. Have you ever considered co-authoring, like actual Carol writing some of the book as well, or is that not something that you've thought about or considered?
I don't think she has the time for it. She's too busy editing.
She's too busy doing everything else.
So yeah, I guess I should talk a bit about how the editing works because it's probably not the normal procedure that other authors would use.
Sure.
So I use a program called Scrivener to do my writing, and I'll write the book. Most books typically have a 3-act structure, pretty standard setup. And then I will read through each act as I complete it and then export it into a Word document. And then she takes it and she'll do 4 passes on it. She'll do a, what do you call it? Developmental edit. And then, of course, she'll do grammar and copy
line.
edit, line edit. There you go.
Proof.
And proof, yeah. And then once that's reached that point, we'll sit down and we'll read through it like out loud. So this usually means we sit right side by side in the office. So she'll have the center monitor up with the text on it. I'll read it out loud, and then sometimes because I'm just so into the story, I'll say something that's not actually written there. So she'll pick up on that, and then we'll add it in or we'll change it. Or sometimes I might say this line doesn't quite sound right, even though I wrote it. And so we'll do sort of that kind of I won't say last minute editing, because then we send it off to an outside editor.
Proofreader.
For proofreading. And then we also have a beta team that we send out the documents to, and they give us feedback. And sometimes that can be quite substantial. I remember back in book number 2, I had introduced these extra knights. And they were just meant to be sort of secondary characters. And the beta readers said, well, we want to know more about these people. And I heard book 4? No, it was book 3 when they go to Weldon.
Yes.
Yeah, the book 3, but they come back in the next book. And so, yeah, I went back and I added a lot more information onto their background, and it made a huge difference. So, I mean, that's valuable feedback. The biggest issue with getting feedback is actually getting the feedback. A lot of people, they want to be beta readers, but then they don't give you feedback on stuff. But we're lucky. We've got a very active group of readers. That helps immensely.
But we also ask specific questions now, and that's the best way to.
Yeah,
that's actually a really important thing to say. So asking specific questions definitely gives you what you're looking for in terms of feedback. Just giving someone a book and says, give me feedback, you could get anything wild. I'm sure you've gotten some feedback that was like, oh, thank you, but no thanks.
It's funny. So I have 3 series on the go, right? Heir to the Crown is like epic fantasy. And Power Ascending is military fantasy. So it's built around military campaigns and that kind of thing. And the last one, The Frozen Flame, is sword and sorcery. We'll get people that love, for example, all the battles and everything. And then on the exact same book, there are other people that just like, I don't like the battles. I just want to skip through them, get to whatever the rest of the story is. So sometimes it's a delicate balancing act because you don't want to push it too far one way at the expense of something else. So it becomes a tricky thing to balance. But that's where the feedback comes in very useful.
Well, I found with the feedback that I've received for my stories that you can kind of intuitively know when feedback lands, and like, oh yeah, that's the type of feedback I want, or that's what I need. And when something's just like, that's a really cool idea, but it's probably not for this book, or, maybe I'll table that for another story or something. And it's not like that's bad feedback. It's just as an author, you kind of get a feeling for, oh yeah, you're right. I agree with you on that. And then some, you might just say, wow, that's an interesting idea, but it's not right. And it's okay to say that, right? I think getting feedback in the first place is important, particularly if it's difficult to get it at all. And then you can discern what makes sense for your story.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was also, it's also really important to get beta readers who don't quite like your writing. I know it sounds strange, but you need them to really part. And we have a couple who find things that need to be changed, and it allows you to make that decision. Is this something that I agree with or I don't agree with? But you don't want everybody to say it's wonderful. You need people to say this doesn't work. Yeah, you need that level of criticism to a certain extent. I mean, you don't want just people to badmouth you. You want constructive criticism. Like I don't want to get the details of the books because I don't want to give away plots. But sometimes something happens and people get upset because maybe somebody died or
somebody didn't die, or like maybe a villain got away or something along these lines. One of the things I really enjoy doing in my books is laying a lot of little tiny story elements that I'll access much later in the series. So there are things in book 1, for example, that come up again in book 14 that might have seemed minor at the time, but they're actually an important plot point.
Very, very cool. So I have to know then, did you plot out all 15 books before you kept writing them, or do you only plot one as you go?
So the Heir to the Crown series is based on a tabletop role-playing game that I ran, and the storyline is about 30% the same as the campaign that I ran.
Nice. Okay.
But that's only the first 5 books. After that, it gets very, very different. So the characters I'd already created, they were the equivalent of non-player characters, and it's interesting because you can try to guess which characters in the book were played by players, but you probably would be wrong. It's surprising, really. The vast majority of them were characters that I would run as the game master, and then I developed them a lot. And once I got to about I'm going to say book 4, maybe book 5, the characters almost took over. Like it's at the point where I know exactly how a given character will react to a given situation, which makes writing things easier to a certain extent. But it means when I'm plotting my outline, I have to make sure this character doesn't act contrary to their normal behavior. And I mean, Carol's had a couple of spots. Like in the last book, I had to change a couple of things because she said, this character wouldn't do that. And I had to say, you're right. We have to change that. But sometimes you just get caught up in the story and then you don't realize what's happening. And of course, the more books you're writing, the more the character background has already been laid down for you. So you kind of have to look back and make those judgment calls.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on the characters not behaving the way they've been written. That's actually one of the more frustrating parts of my reading experience. Whenever I'm reading someone else's book, that always stops me up. When something happens, I'm just like, what? That character wouldn't behave that way. It's frustrating. And then
and movies too, right? Like you watch a movie, something ruins a movie. Like, why is this person doing this? This makes no sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think it's great that you mentioned the characters kind of taking it, running away. Those are I think every writer, whether or not you're a heavy plotter or a pants or a discovery writer, they have elements of both, right? To say that you are just one or the other is just incorrect because here you are. Elements of your story are kind of led by the character, discovered by the character, but at the same time you're plotting. So very cool though. It's just such a fun experience. Do you already have plans for a lot more books, or do you not really plan ahead until you finish the current project you're working on?
Oh, I have lots of plans.
Okay.
I've already the only series I have completed so far is The Frozen Flame.
Okay.
And then next year I'll be completing Heir to the Crown and Power Sending. And then I've already got the next 2 series plotted out. One of them in great detail. It'll be 8 books. The other one in not quite so much detail. It'll be a trilogy. Got to try doing a shorter storyline. But even then, I have ideas for other books and series beyond that as well.
So we're running out of time, but I'm so curious to know what your typical day looks like because that's an insane amount of work that you've already done in such a short amount of time. What does every day look like for you working?
So we get up in the morning, we have breakfast, walk the dogs, and so on, and then I usually sit down to start working sometime between 9 and 10, depending if there's been other things to occupy our time. I will take breaks to make tea. We walk the dogs at lunch and have lunch, obviously, but I only write during the week. I don't write on weekends.
Oh, I see.
So
okay.
Kind of like I treat it as a job, and it's important not to overdo it. Otherwise, you just get burned out. But having said that, it's not unusual for me to come up with some ideas on the weekends when I'm not doing anything. Or like I really like watching old movies, even if they're cheesy. And sometimes even the worst movies have some really interesting concepts that you can sort of pick from and use for story elements. So there's always that. And I mean, let's face it, the fantasy genre is movies are a little cheesier than normal.
Very, very true.
I'm old. I'm 63, so we grew up with movies in the 70s and the 80s, and some of those you don't want to think about what they're like.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I don't think 63 is that old, but that's just my opinion. But take it for what it is. My parents are the same age. So, but it's great though. One thing you say in your TikTok videos that you bring up constantly is you went professional later than other people might have, right? You were 58, sounds like. when you went professional with it?
There, yeah.
Somewhere around there. You've been working full time most of your life, sounds like. Had kids and a life that you were running, and still it wasn't too late for you to make it
Yeah,
happen. And you did.
it's my third career. My first career was in the military.
Mhm.
My second career was the IT instructor, and this is now my third career and probably my final career because I'll be doing this for the rest of my life. I love it.
Hopefully you like it better than the other ones.
Oh yeah, I mean, I didn't have a problem with my other jobs, but I really enjoy writing. And I love working with my wife. We work really well together, so that's an.
That's definitely an added bonus. Very, very cool. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what else you come up with. I don't think I can keep up with you reading wise. I will try to read them all, but I don't think I can get to them all before you publish another 25. So, but I think it's amazing that you've built this. You have this process that you figured out. You've kind of weeded out the weaknesses, and you know what you need to do to get books out and how you and Carol work together. It's just very cool. I love to see it. So hopefully it's encouraging to other people who are in their first phases of writing their first book. It is possible.
I
Practice,
would.
practice.
There's one last piece of advice I'd like to offer
Yeah.
to people that want to be authors, and that is when you're dealing with social media and filming TikToks, Reels, YouTube videos, to always try to be positive and try to avoid negative. You're sure you've heard of the horror stories of authors trying to pick apart people's reviews, and that it just doesn't do anything except make things worse. So concentrate on the positive, and that makes a huge difference as well.
Definitely does. I totally agree as well. I mean, I tend to be a more positive person, but great piece of advice. Highlight the positive.
Yep.
Definitely important. Well, where can people find more information about you and your books if they want to check them out?
They can go to my website at pauljbennettauthor.com, and that has all the information about the different books. There's links there to the different platforms where you can purchase them. Our website will be undergoing a revision shortly. We're just beta testing a new website, but we don't have a final date for when that goes live yet. So you can't order directly from me, but you can. Yeah. All the links are on there for Kobo, Apple, Amazon, and all those other websites as well, and not just ebooks. You can get print books as well.
Very cool. PaulJBennettAuthor.com. Make sure to put that in the show notes. But thank you for joining me today. This has been a great conversation.
It has. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been great.
Plus Carol, thank you as well.
Yes. Carol's going to put in an appearance now.
There you go. An appearance. Quick appearance. All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Paul. He was just a delightful fellow. He and his wife, who I love that she was a guest, an unintentional guest on the podcast. Loved her little voice interjection and he interjecting here and there to say what she's learned and what they're accomplishing as an author marketing exceptional pair. Let's call it that. So very cool to hear from them. And, it provided some interesting insight to me as someone who's hoping someday to go professional in terms of, hey, what steps can I take today, even if small, to reach that point someday. Next week, we'll be talking to Jeffrey P. Schaefer about practical advice for new authors. Jeffrey wrote a book, his debut novel, about the challenges and the successes of a woman who's seeking to make a career out of something that is traditionally not a career. In this case, a baseball player, professional baseball player. So it's very interesting to hear his insight on, and advice to women seeking professional, building businesses or building careers, as well as practical advice for new authors, right? This was his first book. He talks about things that he learned and what that practical advice could mean for you as a new author, if that's where you sit. So I think you'll enjoy that conversation. Definitely join me for that next week. And thank you for your time. I hope you have a great week.